In today's episode of the Writer's Gym podcast, we're going to be looking at the relationship between writing and music. We'll explore music as inspiration for your writing, as well as music as a generator of moods and atmospheres in which you can write. We'll also look at a few examples of literature inspired directly by music. Welcome to the Writer's Gym. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Now, Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Hello.
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 You are both fans of music, and today I want to explore the role that music has played in your writing. I think this might be our first episode that inspires a playlist as well as a reading list. Are you playlist people at all?
I have become a massive playlist person, and I genuinely believe it has helped my productivity. Which, if you said to me before the advent of something in the market that I will not name, but I'm also going to acknowledge has been an enormous help to my work life, I wouldn't have believed quite the difference that it now makes.
Yeah. Well, hold that thought because we'll come back to that shortly. And Emily, what about you? Are you a playlist person?
Huge playlist person. I have been for years. I find it just completely focuses my mind, and I'm one of those people, I can't guarantee that I'm going to have silence, and when I have silence my brain gets really, really busy on other things. So it's like having music keeps the background of my brain occupied, allowing my writing brain to just get on with it. As soon as the music goes, it's like my background brain just starts doing things, and then I'm just distracted. And it's awful.
Well, much more of this to come, listeners. I'm going to start with a question that I think divides the writing community. And it's this: do you write with music in the background, or do you need silence? I mean, I think you both kind of hinted at the answer to this. Do you want to go first, Rachel?
This is something that I play shoot the should fairies with a lot. Now, the should fairies are the shoulds, are the if I were a proper writer, I'd do this, or you should do this, or you should do that, where you're looking at what you should do instead of what actually works for you. Now, my should fairies get quite active over this because the most successful playwright of my generation told me personally, because he's about the same age, God damn him, and, knew each other way back, and James Graham said, love writing in silence, love writing at home, at a time when, possibly for mental health reasons actually, and anxiety reasons, I found it easier to be in a cafe with loads of people's lives around me, loads of noise. It was like this sort of washing machine of, it was just a noise that was ambient to me. Ambient washing machine, who knows? But I really loved that cafe atmosphere, and I couldn't be as productive in silence. What's changed now is I have done more writing, seen more of my writing go out there, and have more proof in the world that I've got my own process. And my process, whether I like it or not, 90% of the time is much more efficient if there is music. And we'll come on to what kind of music that is. And it's not going to just be any music. There will be things that make me less productive, for sure. But if I have what for me are the right conditions, it does make a huge difference. There are times when silence is the right thing for what I'm doing, but they are less usual. They're the 10%. Normally it's very specific categories and playlists.
I've got an image now of you sitting in a cafe with headphones on listening to thrash metal, but I'm sure you'll put that image out of my head very soon. What about you, Emily? I mean, I think you've answered the question that you do listen to music while you write, but what sort of stuff can you listen to?
Well, I do listen to music, but I do sometimes have silence. But what is always the case is I have my headphones on. And as soon as I have my headphones on, I'm like in my room, and it clamps out enough of the surrounding noise to just make me focus. If there is extra stuff going on in the background, I do tend to listen to music. And when I listen to music, it tends to be when I'm writing music without lyrics. Music with lyrics gets at my background brain, and then I get distracted. It tends to be quite eclectic music, quite dramatic music, And that's where the playlists come in, because I create playlists for mood. And then if I'm writing a battle scene, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to be listening to Pachelbel's Canon. It's going to be something more, more dramatic than that. And I think it would be weird if anyone writes a battle scene to something like Pachelbel's Canon in D. That would be very strange, like a bit of Chopin in the background. Tinkly music while my characters are slashing the hell out of people and getting covered in blood. It would just be really, really strange to the mood. So it tends to be heavier.
But very much geared towards the mood that you're trying to generate within your writing. I mean, the film Raging Bull actually used opera against the quite brutal scenes of boxing. Cavalleria Rusticana, I think, was the piece that was used. So there are instances of reflective or classical music against violent scenes. I guess it's what works for you, isn't it?
I think it's a choice, and I think it's something that can be inserted afterwards to sort of provide that juxtaposition, especially with visuals, when you're sort of trapped in the artistic vision of what's being created. When you're actually doing the writing of the thing, I think having that juxtaposition, I don't know if you'd be able to, sort of write with the juxtaposition, or if it's just something that you would add later as like a sort of comment or commentary or something. I don't know. Maybe they wrote with it. I have no context for that.
And it is, again, about finding what works for you. And sometimes what works for you might surprise you. And that can go into should territory of why would this music fit this thought? But this is how we make discoveries we wouldn't have otherwise made. Sometimes music that seems a complete, not a juxtaposition, just a total contrast to what I'm trying to go for, will absolutely work. And I will start naming names later, but that concept absolutely works, that sometimes just by going somewhere unexpected in the background, the conscious mind can catch up with other ideas, other confluences, if you can abstract, which I'm pretty sure you can't, other confluences.
And Rachel, for you, is it always instrumental music? Is it a particular type of music, or does it vary?
There are two things going on with me. One is that no lyrics will be more efficient than lyrics, except if I know them so well that my brain is not engaging consciously in analysing them, in any of that, in decoding them, if you like. When I was writing Twisted Branches, I would start Twin Peaks, the official soundtrack, at the beginning every writing session. And I've got a playlist where I've taken out the ones with lyrics, except one as it happens. But I would move through that, and that ritual my brain caught on with, and it knew that it was in a writing session, and it was a writing session for this thing. And that was never conscious. I just went, oh, what do I play? I want to play this, over and over again, until there was absolutely no question about it. This was what was happening. This was what worked. And now I'm back to writing the novel that I was writing when other things happened. I started doing all of that. The music that I'm playing now, I do find that I get a playlist together and then I start it at the same point each time. And I tried just pressing play the other day where I'd left off and expected to just continue, and my brain said, nope, that's distracting. We're not supposed to be here yet. We're supposed to be at the beginning. Take us back to the beginning, or we're not playing. And I got bullied out of that by my subconscious and had to start at the beginning, and that worked. And that is an instrumental Pink Floyd playlist.
Nice. So there's something about the routine of it then for you.
That does seem to work at the moment, but it's got to be a routine of something that has been developed, and it didn't appear fully formed. That's a bunch of tracks that I've put together for reasons I may not even be consciously aware of, but it works. And occasionally something with lyrics will slip through, like Talking Hawkin. I think it's on Endless River, isn't it? And they will have those bits coming in, or Shine On You Crazy Diamond. There are lyrics in there, and sometimes, depending on my mood, I have to go away and press move to next track, or sometimes it's fine and I'm not in complete command of when or why that is. Lyrics can work under two circumstances: one, when I know them really, 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 really well and I'm in exactly the right mood for them, and the other when I'm in a cafe, at which point my brain is utterly forgiving of everything around me because it knows it's not my brain's problem. My brain is dealing with writing, everything else is as maybe. Can't switch off like that at home, can switch off like that when not at home.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Now, Emily, I know that one thing that you've done as an audio drama writer is that you've created playlists that you sent to me. I think we've sent them to actors to get them into the mood or the mindset of the piece that we're going to be recording. And that concept of the playlist as a mood board, I find really useful. And can you say a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I write from different points of view when I'm writing my novels. So I have a playlist per character. You know, a lot of people have a playlist for the whole book. And I have done that before with different projects. But for the Dex universe, I have an Isra, Ren, and a Varian separate playlist. And they are very specific to them. And they have certain tracks in common. But really, what those playlists are, they're tracks with lyrics. And I listen to them in between writing sessions or when I'm walking somewhere and I want to get into a certain headspace. And yeah, it came about because when I'd be walking places, I'd be listening to music and I'd listen to the lyrics and I think, oh my God, this is such a Ren track, or this is such an Isra track. Like, you know, it's so like them. So I started just putting them into a playlist, and then it became really, really useful. And then when it came to briefing the actors, I did send them the playlists because I'm like, well, anything that they have is fodder for their performance. I get something from the playlists as a sort of, this is who this person is, and this sort of like captures a certain mood at a certain time in their life. So there's probably an element of that they can draw on as actors. I've sent them orchestral tracks as well, especially in the first episode of The Bomb. There is a scene that was entirely born of listening to a track by Thomas Bergersen, who is an amazing composer of very dramatic music and very varied music as well. His music, especially when I listen to that, sometimes a whole scene from a book will just come into life in my brain. And then it's a case of, in the book somewhere, it's like that scene will come up. So I know that this scene happened and it was right back in episode 1 in The Bomb. So I sent Kelsey the scene because it was an Isra moment. And then I've got another one that's coming up. It probably won't be, if we get that far, it will probably be about a season 5 event that is all based on a completely different piece of music. Yeah, weirdly, the music itself can just completely, it's like then a soundtrack for a movie that happens in my brain and features all of my characters. So it can be that it just provides blank space for my brain to work in. It can be that the music directly influences what I'm writing and what happens in the story and becomes the movie soundtrack. But the soundtrack comes first. It's very strange. But I know I'm not the only one who does this. I've spoken to some other writers who this happens for them as well. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So I think, already we have 2 categories of music. One is the music to kind of G yourself up to write, to get yourself into the mood, get yourself into the zone, or to share with other people who are collaborating in your work. So Kelsey, who you mentioned there, is one of our actresses who plays in the Dex Legacy. And then the other is the playlist that you can listen to while you write. Now, yes,
I have a whole Dex Legacy soundtracks playlist. And yeah, that's just all classical music that is very in the style of.
Yeah, I'll talk about some of the music that I listen to while working shortly. But Rachel, I think it's fair to say there is one particular musician who has been quite an influence on you. Anyone who knows you, I'm sure, will know who this is. But do you want to say a little bit more about this person?
Musically, or just for people who might have just tuned in, last series, when my desk was facing the other way around and we were having our conversations, you were looking over my shoulder at Aladdin Sane on the wall. So David Bowie has been very influential to me and to my partner, whose poster it actually is. But the reason he is my muse in that way, although he is one of my favourite artists, it's not predominantly musical. Yes, I adore his music, most of it, but it's more that he would keep changing. It was that he is the antithesis of, I couldn't possibly, what might people think, or what does this say about me if I do this, or what does this say about me if I don't do this, and into exploration. And absolutely everything about his career was about expanding, because he started off in the sort of model of Anthony Newley and other people that he looked up to, but he went, what's around the next corner. So ideologically, he's absolutely my muse, and that is life as well as art. But really, it's about that ability to change. So I listen to him for myself, and I do have a Bowie instrumentals track that I write to. But while it does influence my writing, it's philosophy first, if you like. But I grew up listening to a lot of 60s, as is probably very obvious, 60s and 70s and 80s music. So it was things like, I mean, my first love was Paul McCartney, and I absolutely stand by that, and the Beatles. Also, the way that writing feeds into that. So we've talked previously about Star Trek being an enormous influence in terms of how we look at other people, that the really scary, big, important journeys are always internal. However far you go out into the universe, you're also having to go further in. And that theme tune, for a lot of people of those generations, absolutely hit the nail of what it was trying to say, those first couple of chords, and the concept of the final frontier. And, yes, society has moved on. Yes, things can look dated, but those ideas are still absolutely at the heart of what I'm talking about when I talk about David Bowie, that it is about who am I? What does that mean? How will that be ever changing? How do I keep growing? So because I knew that you were going to ask me that, I did bring the postcard that normally lives on the other bookcase, so that you have at least got a picture of who you are talking about right now. So there he is in the 90s, and he can go up there. But
so I think for our listeners who aren't watching this, that's the Earthling, or a cutout of the Earthling cover of Bowie from the Earthling cover, isn't it? So I can't believe you missed the opportunity to say changes rather than just changes there, Rachel. But I respect that.
It's actually an interesting one for me, because as writers, when we're helping people not use cliches in their work, I always make a habit of reminding them and myself that another way of saying cliche is stock phrase, one that you've taken off the shelf, fully formed. And the problem that we have is when something has made it into the language, people go, oh yeah, I know that, and don't look behind it at what it means. So yes, changes, but more importantly for me is a song that gets really overlooked, which is Word on a Wing. Now he was a bit apologetic for that, and the MTV is describing it as, and this was when I was off my face on the following substances, and this was an absolute cry for help. And it's this very, very simple, very, very short few lyrics, one of which is, and I don't stand in my own light. And it's a reminder that no matter how big or impressive you appear to other humans, we're not entirely responsible for our own luck or output. And he was using the image of God, but the way that I, as you know, look at God is you don't have to see it as he did, as at that point as a being. Or he said he didn't, but anyway, as a being on a cloud. It's just the idea of there being a universe bigger than yourself, or a power bigger than yourself. Again, it's the braver you get about yourself, the more you realize it's not about you. It's the message, not the messenger. Always, we are not there for our own ego. We are there to be a tool for whatever the messages are, whatever the thoughts are that we're passing on into the world. So he is a reminder of all those things to me.
And Emily, any particular musicians or artists or composers that have had a similar influence on you?
Yeah, weirdly, again, Thomas Bergersen. I mean, his music is insanely evocative. It's dramatic. It doesn't take any prisoners. It doesn't hold anything back. Weirdly, I feel like that resonates with me as a writer, because I don't hold anything back. I'm a reasonably fearless writer. If I'm doing something and I find myself hiding, I pull myself out of the hiding place and I think, why am I doing this? I'm constantly interrogating myself, constantly sort of challenging myself and saying, am I doing my characters down right now by keeping what they're going through hidden, by hiding from what they're going through, from what I'm putting them through? And so that fearlessness comes from, I think, obviously it comes from within, but his music really inspires me in that respect. And I know that he's made a lot of music in the past, and he's done, when he was studying music, he was told, oh, you're not going to amount to anything. You're not going to make a living with this style of music. And he's since become incredibly successful and prolific. And it's because he's made his own path and he's done his own thing. And he's been true to his own style at every step and every twist and turn. And there is a place for him. And even though the people at the beginning of his career couldn't see it, he's made it. And that also resonates, because the stuff that I write, it has been described as like, it's not really like any other sci-fi, and it's certainly not like literary, and it's not magical realism, and it's not any of these things. It doesn't fit into any boxes comfortably, yet there is an audience for it. And we know this because of the Dex legacy and the audience that it's already building. And I feel a certain, I guess, kinship, and it's the hard work route, because you don't have anyone saying, yes, I will give you lots of money and run a marketing campaign for you and put you in the windows of all of the bookshops and you'll be a phenomenon overnight. And nobody's doing that. But at the same time, you know that there's people there who are prepared to enjoy your work, and you know that there's potential there, so you're just working at it anyway. That all resonates.
give you awards for it, Emily.
Yeah, that happened lately. Yes, won an award at the weekend, BSFA for best audio fiction, which was very nice. I think I got home and my spouse reminded me of a prediction they made a few years ago that was, I'm going to be the most successful unpublished author in history, which I think is actually, step by step becoming the case. I've won an award for something in this medium. My novel is still on submission and, hasn't been accepted by any of the big editors. But here I am with an award for something in that universe. I'm sitting here wearing merch of my thing. Yeah. It's really weird to be in that position. And
can I throw in something just to compare?
Yeah.
The phrase that John Lennon had mounted in gold for Aunt Mimi, who brought him up after his mother died, was the phrase that she had said to him a lot, which was, playing the guitar's all well and good, John, but you'll never make a living out of it. And to her credit, I believe she did actually put it on the wall.
Yeah, he did okay, and Emily, I'm sure you will do more than okay once people cotton on.
Here is hoping, and for anyone listening, I'm sitting here with both of my hands and fingers crossed. So yeah, here is hoping.
And with a perfectly good mantelpiece that I do not see the award on.
No.
Oh, it's on the piano. I should have it in the background. You're right. Missed opportunity.
Well, I mean, and obviously on the piano for a discussion about music is exactly the right place for a reward to go, isn't it? So I want to think a little bit now about music directly influencing your writing, as opposed to, helping the creative juices flow as a background playlist. And Rachel, have you ever written anything influenced by a piece of music, by Bowie or whoever?
Yes. Short story collection, which was nominated for a British Fantasy Award a couple of years ago.
We're award name dropping now, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
quite you didn't comment on it when you guys did it. But it was a collection by Black Shuck Book. Anyway, it's called Dreamland. And I wrote a story which was me exploring how people looked at other people at university and the idealized form of how you saw other people in your social circle and the perfectionizing or villainizing that we do of other people. And that was my idea of sort of Dreamland, was the sort of fantasy world that we all live in about each other. And some of the action followed the form of a Leonard Cohen song. And I knew that putting the lyrics in was never going to be a financially viable option. So I built it up, wrote the story, took the lyrics out. And the song isn't there for anyone except me in that story. But I have enjoyed using them as the spinal column. When a song speaks to you, sometimes, like for Emily, it'll go in the character bank for this particular person. But sometimes it will suggest a plot, or it will suggest another way of walking through it. And that happens from time to time. A song has a story that you want to go and find. And with that, you have every songwriter that any of us follow will have had stories where they talk about how some fan or other says, oh, it was amazing the way you did exactly this, that, and the other, and it meant exactly this and the other. And you've got them going, yeah, that's exactly what I did. And of course, that has been there for the fan, but it doesn't mean it was that you knew you were putting that there exactly when you were writing it. And that can be very exciting.
Now, Emily, you are, when you write your audio drama, The Dex Legacy, you're in a very fortunate position of having a soundtrack what was written for you or for it. It's not just the one piece of music that's the theme. We've got 7 or 8, I think, different pieces of incidental music that we can use as well. Knowing that you've got that soundtrack, do you ever write with that in mind when you're writing scripts?
Yes. Sometimes I will listen to it sort of in the background. Sometimes I'll listen to it before I get started. And it's kind of a case of like, everything I write needs to read like it sounds like this, which probably sounds strange, but it's like if you're writing something that looks like something, if you've seen a work of art or something and you're writing something behind it, I listen to the soundtrack and I think, okay, what I'm writing here has to flow from this. Sometimes it is just fun to listen to. I mean, let's face it, I've got a soundtrack for my world. It's insane. I love it. I'm a soundtrack nerd, as you can probably tell. And the idea that I have music that's specifically for my thing still blows my mind when I'm listening to the tracks. It's still weird and wonderful. And it's one of the coolest things about doing what we've done with the Dex Legacy. So yeah, definitely. I listen to it. I listen to it when I'm working. I listen to it sometimes because Alan Stroud, he's got a SoundCloud, and the SoundCloud, I mean, it's got some of the Dex Legacy tracks on it, but it's also got other things that he's written on it. And I love his music. So I'll just put his SoundCloud on in the background when I'm working, sometimes on Dex stuff, and it's wonderful. I'm a massive fan.
Yeah. I know that some of the post-production conversations have been, okay, which piece of music are we going to have between this scene and that scene? And we've got pieces that evoke certain moods, certain atmospheres. And sometimes when I'm doing that, I'm picking from, I don't know, 7 or 8 pieces of music, and we're having conversations about it. I'm just thinking, gosh, we're lucky, aren't we?
We are so lucky, and it's insane. I mean, there was one particular track that Alan wrote, and I loved it so much, and I shared it with some of my friends at my last job. I was at a game studio, and they were like, "This could be Mass Effect. This could be straight from a game soundtrack. This is insane. I'd love to play it at the beginning of an RPG, and or something like that." And they were really, really. It was just an exciting moment. When you hear something that's really cool, and you're like, okay, yes, I'm going to share this. I can't not share it. It's you can probably tell from my voice that I'm incredibly excited.
Reasonably excited about this. Yes. Now, one other a piece of writing that is very, very, or style of writing that is very directly influenced by music is, of course, writing lyrics. And I wanted to ask whether either of you had a go at lyric writing.
Yeah.
Ooh.
My cousin Naomi Banks is a neo soul singer, and we were having a conversation last year about how I'm just not interested in writing songs. I don't think my brain works like that. And then the next day I texted her and said, how I said I don't do that? I think I've written a song. Would you have a look at it? And it had come out of a conversation that we'd had about elements and things that were going on in our lives. And it felt like a poem/song. And she said, oh, yeah, no, I'll have a look. I'll give you notes. And then she texted me back, I have no notes. This is great. What are you going to do with it? I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I have been busy with a lot of other things, but that is definitely something that I would like to have a life. Yes. And it's another of those should fairies I mentioned, reaching for the shoot for earlier, which was, I'm not in this category. I'm not a writer who, which is only just slightly below I'm not a person who, in terms of how our brains shut doors they don't need to, and the unnecessary generalization. So that's one where I need to show myself that I nearly did that, and I don't have to do that.
What about you, Emily? Have you had a go at the world of lyrics?
I mean, I've had a go. My dad was a lyricist. He was a musician, and yeah, his lyrics, he was very good. And he played guitar. He wasn't classically trained at all. He was completely self-taught. And when my sister and I were growing up, he sent us to music lessons. It was very much a case of, you will learn to play the piano. And he wanted us basically to have a more structured musical learning, because I think it was something that he never had. But it didn't hold him back. I mean, he was the lyricist, he was the singer-songwriter. I've tried, but I mean, I think that lyrics and music, the lyrics and the music often have to come together in a kind of symbiotic kind of structure relationship. It's that I struggle with. I can write poems and I can write music separately. I've got a character, I've mentioned her before, my sort of muse character is called Lola, and she doesn't have words, but she has music. And I've got a piece of music, her theme, I play it on the piano, you know, I composed this for her, and that's absolutely fine. If I try sticking words to that, it's an absolute disaster. In the future, maybe I will have, like, you know, a flash of inspiration and it will happen, and I'll write a song or something. But I'm not in a particular hurry to do that. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that, you know, and not force yourself into a certain route or try really hard when it's not happening. I can say my dad was the singer-songwriter. He was not a novelist. I'm a novelist, but I'm not a singer-songwriter, and that's okay. You know, like I'm, you know, primarily, and that's again like shooting your fairies and everything. I say that, but it's like, for now, that is not me.
Yeah, and, just to be absolutely clear on that, it's a question of which doors we've closed in our own faces without acknowledging, in order to give ourselves false certainty so we don't have to think about something. That's when it's not helpful. If there was a curiosity in you, as in, so far I haven't done much with this, but I wonder what would happen if. It's a question of what happens then. If you then say to yourself terribly loudly and convincingly, oh no, the music and the words must happen at the same time, then a must has come in and it's no longer authentic, and you have shut that door in your face. On the other hand, if it's, well, that hasn't happened before, but if something comes along, whatever, you know, I'm busy with this other thing now. For me, that's a healthier place to be, because it's not saying I am defined by anything. And I realize this is absolutely not what you were doing. I totally see what you were doing. But for example, where I might have someone who has fed themselves the line all their life, oh, my sister's the creative one. All of creativity belongs to one member of a family, and you know, because like if I was saying, oh, Naomi is the singer, I'm dematerializing a whole aspect of my own personality. You know, it is infinite, and coming from a abundance mindset is fundamentally healthy, in that there's a lot of it out there and in here, and we all have the right to explore what we want, but we don't. That's the thing.
I think that comes from maturity. I think it's basically like, I mean, when you're raising kids, if one is good at one thing, one is more naturally inclined towards the other. I think there is a temptation to say, well, they're the scientific one, but you're the creative one or something, because it makes a kid feel better about the fact that there is a sort of like the danger of sibling rivalry there. Like both of them want to get into science, but one of them is better than the other. And then there's natural heartbreak from that, because they're children, and kids will probably end up feeling that sort of one-upmanship, especially when it comes to our school system and the way it's sort of framed, and the testing culture and all of the rest of it in sort of child development and all of the rest, and life. And I think that probably comes from that. And I think that what we should probably do better is, once you get to a certain age, encourage the shedding of that. You know, like that should be more of a sort of like later in life, we can diversify. But so many people, I think, hold on to those labels that were kind of helpful when they were kids, probably were never helpful, but it's a tempting thing to do, you know, like just to make a kid feel better. It's sort of like, well, have a chocolate. It doesn't really solve the problem, but it you know, it makes the kid feel better in the short term. But when you're an adult, it can just stick walls in front of you and stop you from actually doing things.
Bringing us back to David Bowie, changes. It's when it is time.
Yes.
When it is time, you will have something in you that I talk about as curiosity. And it is sometimes time to grow beyond those. And that's when we can be curious and we can be outward looking, or we can do that full certainty thing I was talking about, which does keep you stuck. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
to say it's easy. I am never saying these things are easy, but I'm saying they
No,
are
no.
possible.
Well, it's getting out of entrenched thinking, which is an entire area of philosophy, which is, you know, we have been raised to think like this, and getting out of those trenches is a mental exercise in itself. And it can be completely redefining when it comes to character and world perception and self-perception and everything. It's hard. Breaking these barriers down is hard. What's on the other side can be really fun, though. So we should all be doing it like all the time, interrogating these rules that we put in place. But yeah, it is hard. It is hard to do. Yeah.
Well, a couple of writers that have ventured into the world of lyrics in collaboration with musicians. Neil Gaiman, married to Amanda Palmer.
Divorced from Amanda
Palmer. Did a few shows with her, wrote some lyrics with her. And Robert McFarlane, collaboration with the actor, musician Johnny Flynn. A couple of really well-received albums. So, yes, there are examples of writers venturing into the world of lyrics, stepping out of their comfort zone and doing something different, cool, and inspiring to them. Talking of inspiration, are there pieces of music that you have used? We'll get into some specifics now of actual pieces of music and actual musicians that you've used either to get out of a rut or to give you particular inspiration when your writing isn't going as you wanted it to. Anything that you'd like to share with our listeners?
There's a book that I love very much. Jennifer Stile, who was on the first series of the Writers' Gym, my favourite of her novels, Exile Music, which is set in ever so slightly pre-Second World War Vienna, and everything crumbles. It's very much implicit in the title about music and how fundamental it is to life, to identity. But one of the things that she does in that book is she structures the book as Mahler's Third Symphony. So you have an opening that is the orchestra starting up, and the book has as many sections as the symphony does. So
cool.
she does very literally use that as the structure of that book. And I found that not simply for those reasons, but for every reason under the sun, enormously affecting. I think it's an absolutely wonderful novel.
Yeah. So, Emily, any particular pieces of music or books about music that have influenced or inspired you?
So I would say, actually, so I have a background in music, and I, you know, as I mentioned, I play piano, I play cello, I sing. I've played as part of an orchestra before. I've sung in choirs, and having that familiarity with how music is structured gives me a way in to the music. So I can be listening to something and I will pick out things in the orchestra and things that are going on in different sections and question and answer phrases and things like that. When I talk to other people, they just hear the piece of music, you know, like they, you know. And so one of the things I would say is you can go on YouTube and you can watch, you know, an orchestra playing your favorite pieces of music. And sometimes it is worth doing that. It's worth just watching an orchestra, watching a conductor, watching the sort of versions that are going on, and just understanding a bit more about the music behind something. And then that gives you another way in when you're listening. And I was raised on Disney's Fantasia. Okay. And now I look back on that, it's a bit of a fever dream. Okay. But it's also very good for providing a direct example of how you can tell stories through music. And allowing the mind to experience music visually, whether it's in like abstract images or colors or all sorts of things. It introduces the sections of the orchestra with color at one point, which is very interesting. So even though, I mean, it does sometimes when you're watching it feel like you've just smoked something very interesting, but definitely I would give it a watch if you haven't already, because it is really, it's a good grounding in like sort of imaginative approaches to well-known pieces of music and how you can let those influence a story and how you can have fun with it.
Speaking of those influences, an example that we really have to give a standing ovation to here is Daisy Jones and the Six, because you had Fleetwood Mac, you had the relationships within Fleetwood Mac, you had the novel Daisy Jones and the Six, you then had the programs off it, you've now got the soundtrack available, and that was art recreating itself around
it really was,
around those personal stories and the music within that band in no particular order, and it was just cumulative.
I enjoyed that much more. The I think Netflix or Amazon Prime, I can't remember, the show I enjoyed much more than I thought I was going to, because it was basically Fleetwood Mac, and what better story of a band has there ever been than the story of Fleetwood Mac?
I'd also say it's wonderfully also not Fleetwood Mac. It is its own story. Yes, we can see it in there, but those are characters that stand up on their own, and it's not just preaching to the converted. You do not need to be a fan of the band or even know the original songs in order to be present in that story, which I think is really impressive.
Indeed. And Emily, have you got any recommendations for books or shows inspired by music that you'd like to share with us?
Fantasia would be my one, but I did want to talk about, I mean, this is just something that I've noted down here to natter about a bit, which is music in TV and film and things like this. So basically, Lord of the Rings does this really interesting thing with leitmotif, which is I think it was Wagner coined the term, or it was applied to Wagner's opera, which is basically every place or person has a theme. So in the opera, that would mean that somebody walks on stage and a certain theme plays for that person, so you know who they are. And in Lord of the Rings, this is used. Howard Shore, there's a specific theme for the Shire, which then carries across to the Hobbits. There's a specific theme for everywhere that you go. And this shows, I mean, like when Boromir stands up in the Council of Elrond and speaks, there's a horn playing the Gondor theme in the background that you can easily miss. But all of this sound adds a depth to all of the characters and adds a sort of cohesion to the place. And that is a really cool thing to do with music. And also, like, the whole introduction section to How to Train Your Dragon, the movie, John Powell's soundtrack. In that one introduction, you have all of the leitmotifs that are going to come back throughout the story, all introduced, apart from the Toothless theme. All of them are there. And then they get, they resurface throughout the movie at different parts and different, where they're sort of applicable. But it's a great introduction to the music and the world and the themes that are going to come back and back and back. And I think that maybe this is where soundtracks, and this is where, it's such a symbiotic relationship.
You've just made me realise something really, really spooky, which I had not realised until the second, which is, when I said for Twisted Branches, it was the Angelo Badalamenti Twin Peaks theme, in which they do exactly what you've just described, where every character has their own motif and they get joined together and then they're on their own in these bits. Exactly the same thing, which is, of course, what I was writing was a short story cycle in which you don't understand how all the bits join up at first, but gradually as you move through the book, all of them do that. And that may just be a beautiful coincidence, but blimey.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like composing. Some stories are like composing.
Through this series, we've often talked about books that are examples, writers that have examples of things we're talking about. So I want to, before we come to the challenge, just a few examples of books about or inspired by music. So I've got 3 that I would recommend. I was going to say Daisy Jones and the Six, actually, but I've got a couple of books about bands that I've really enjoyed. And the first one is Espedair Street by Iain Banks, which is I guess a sort of similar band to the band in Daisy Jones and the Six, but it all ends horribly as band breakups make a better story than bands that just keep going and end up playing smaller and smaller venues. David Mitchell's Utopia Avenue is kind of half music, half cultural and social history of the late 60s, early 70s. and the band and the musicians in that one bump into the likes of Leonard Cohen and members of the Beatles and members of the Rolling Stones in various parties in London and New York. Wonderful read. And the final one I was going to say is Julian Barnes' The Noise of Time, which is about the life of Shostakovich and his repression under the Soviet era during the Cold War, and the fact that he had to live in an apartment with his bags packed all the time because he was expecting to be arrested because he just wouldn't make the music that the regime wanted him to make. So all really, really good books to recommend about music or inspired by music. Do we have any more, Rachel and Emily?
Yes. I mean, I'm going to give a second shout out to the one I mentioned earlier, because there are not enough shout outs in the world for Exile Music by Jennifer Stile, for reasons already talked about. That's absolutely top of my list music wise. I'm going to take you on a very quick tour through 3 other titles, one of which is an example among many others, The Flame by Leonard Cohen, which is his last poetry collection. You'll see songs turn up in different forms, in different motifs throughout his poetry and albums, and the images and the characters. It's very much a universe of its own, but The Flame is a really lovely place to start, and it is very musical, and it does take our liturgy and the music of that. And immediately in saying that, I want to mention his album You Want It Darker, which is very much in conversation with all of this and around music. But a couple of others: This Must Be the Place by Maggie O'Farrell, which is the song title, and how music and the structure of our lives and the structure of music reflect each other, is great fun. Looking Glass Sound by Katrina Ward. It's not music per se, but sound plays a deep part in wonderful story. Those are quite a nice place to start, I think.
Excellent. Again, just before we come to our writing challenge for today, Emily, you've mentioned one particular composer, Thomas Bergersen.
Yes, repeatedly. Yes,
repeatedly. Yes. And we've also mentioned Alan Stroud. Anyone else? Any other sort of music that you would like to recommend our listeners have a go at listening to while writing?
Oh gosh, yeah, okay. I mean, obviously, I also mentioned Howard Shore, which is, who is great. Trevor Jones, his soundtrack for Merlin, which I think was 90s. It's amazing. And it's just pure magic. That's sort of how I would, sort of describe it. I mean, I would go to, because I'm such a soundtracks person, I would go to games and movies that you're already a fan of, and just find the soundtracks for those and see what the music does and see how the music inspires you. And sometimes if you haven't been listening for the music, it will just be something that you haven't even thought about. And then when you're listening to it, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's a thing. And, that was in the background, and then it will become your own, and you'll put your own identity onto that music.
I've discovered so many lovely and useful things, and that's something that wasn't there when I started writing. Just as technology, you can go off on your, in my case, Angelo Badalamenti rabbit hole and find people he's worked with, people that if you like this, you might like that. And I think it does it better than the Rainforest site, actually. I think it does it more nuanced.
I think another one that does radio sort of stuff is YouTube. So if you've been listening to a track on YouTube, a bunch of tracks, then it will recommend others. It will carry on playing, and then it will go into something else that's similar. And that has taken me places. I have discovered so many artists in that way, and then I listen to them on other platforms, and I find more of their music by doing that. It's a process of discovery. It's basically saying, okay, well, you've got to find these people somehow. How do you find them? If you haven't got friends who are also into soundtracks, who are also into, like creating the same stuff as you got to find it somewhere. And YouTube has done a lot. There's some really wonderfully nerdy people out there who have created 10-hour playlists in one video of music, and then you just go through and it's like, and they've got a whole list of the artists and, you know, where each track starts and ends, and then that leads me to find out more from those artists as well, and you know, go and subscribe to their particular channels and things like that.
One of those things that a lot of people post about in the lead up to Christmas is what that site recommends, the reports as you're listening for the year. And that site told me again this year that Mogwai was my most listened to artist. And I think they are, for people that outrageously don't know Mogwai, they're one of the loudest live bands you'll ever see, but they do mostly instrumental post-rock. And I think it's great for writing to or working to. So Mogwai and Sigur Ros were doing very, very similar things. And my recommendation, going back to what you were saying about soundtracks, Emily, Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, very famous for Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, but they've also done lots and lots of soundtracks. But my favourite is soundtrack for a film that wasn't a particularly special film called Wind River, which was a kind of noirish detective thing set in freezing Midwest of America, and just a wonderful soundtrack. And then finally, another person more associated with a band doing lots of really great soundtrack stuff is Jonny Greenwood, who is a guitarist in Radiohead, but is just doing some wonderful soundtrack work in movies as well. So we'll put some of these links into the show notes as always. Now, Rachel, do you have a exercise or challenge for us associated with music, please?
Here's one that does two quite interesting things at once. And to do this exercise, you need to pick a song. And it might be a song that you already know and love. It might be one of the ones in our show notes that you have never heard before and you fancy just challenging yourself to go and play with. Listen to the thoughts and the feelings that you have when you play that song, and put them in a different head. It might be that you are a character in that song, or it might be that you are a person who loves that song and what's going on for them. But those are two ways that you can use that song the same way that you pick up a writing prompt off a table, a picture or a word. Those are two different ways that you can use a song as your writing prompt. And probably like me, you'll think you need to keep the song in it. And then gradually, as you maybe do another draft of that and you take away the lines of the song and you don't need to pay the royalties to that person anymore, you're left with something that you would never otherwise have had, and nobody else would ever have had either if you hadn't found it there.
That's a great exercise.
Really is, yeah. I'm going to be trying that one myself, I think. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us for this little trot through the world of music as inspiration, background to writing. As always, Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
as is now the customary ending of our show. Thank you for listening to the Writer's Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writer's Gym, please go to rachelknightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writer's Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for The Writer's Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.